Welcome to Washington Hospital Today, dedicated to informing residents about healthcare topics and issues. Through programs featuring community forums and free health and wellness classes, our goal is to empower community members with the information needed to make informed health decisions. Washington Hospital has been providing healthcare to the residents of the Washington Township Healthcare District for the past 60 years. Welcome to today's presentation, Healing Food, Our Food Choices and Our Health, is presented by Dr. Sarah Wartman, Vascular Surgeon with the Washington Township Medical Foundation. And now, please welcome Dr. Wartman.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Tonight we're going to talk about nutrition for health, a real food diet. Just so you know, it's a very comprehensive topic, and it's probably something we could talk about for hours on end. I'm going to try to summarize it as best as possible and keep it concise, and hopefully I can give you something worth your while. So when we approach health and nutrition with our patients, we like to take a holistic approach. That's a term that's used to describe therapies that attempt to treat patients as a whole person. The idea is that the body's natural state is one of health, and that an illness or a disease is an imbalance in the body system. Obviously, the concept of holistic medicine is not new. Holistic medicine has existed in ancient healing traditions and cultures for thousands of years. And a lot of times in medicine, we sort of specialize and subspecialize to the point where we sort of are looking at all of the individual parts, and we don't really take a step back and look at the patient as a whole. But when it comes to health and nutrition, and especially vascular and cardiovascular health, it's essential to look at the whole individual. When it comes to food, we have to think about how these things affect our overall health. So we're affected by our environment, but it's not just our physical environment or exposures to things. It's not just our stress levels. It's not just our life or our jobs. It's also the foods we put inside our body. So if you are exposed to toxic foods, you can add stress to an already stressed system. That stress leads to inflammation, and then chronic inflammation leads to chronic disease. So holistic nutrition deals with the bigger picture of food. Remember, we don't eat individual nutrients separate from each other. We eat whole foods, or at least we should be. We want to take into consideration the balance of those foods in our overall health. And what you'll find is real food diets are nutritious and sustainable, and they think about what it is you need to sustain a healthy life. Fad diets and popular diets that come and go, they're generally unsustainable, and they focus on small aspects of the bigger picture. So it's really important to remember that you can enjoy what you eat. And what you might expect to be unhealthy might not actually be unhealthy. And what you've been told is healthy or heart healthy might actually not be good for you. So real foods can be delicious. Unfortunately, with medical recommendations, there was a time where we sort of worked backwards from what we found in blood vessels and plaque buildup. And what we saw was fat and cholesterol. And what we thought was, well, if they're found in the blood vessels, they must be clogging your arteries. I'm sure you've heard that before. And so we should take those out of our diet so that we don't cause them to clog the arteries. So the years of advice that led patients to eat low-fat and low-cholesterol diet has backfired. What it led to was an industry that built up around this so-called low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. And when taking out these high-quality, valuable, flavorful foods, we were adding sugar and refining our grains and putting in preservatives and trying to make these things shelf-stable, and we ended up causing worsening heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. And unfortunately, those tenets have stuck with us throughout the years, despite evidence to show that these margarines, these refined oils and sugars, that they're actually much worse for you. So you may have heard of a plant-based diet. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is a true plant-based diet, which means plants as a major source of nutrients, right? Fruits, vegetables, they're essential to a healthy diet. They're full of antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. That includes other plant foods like beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds. So a plant-based diet is not bad per se, but the problem is that the idea of it has sort of been co-opted by the industrial food system, and it's now become a buzzword rather than a strategy for health. So when we say plant-based, what we really mean is that your diet is filled with plant foods in addition to other nutrient-dense foods. This is a few examples here of some high antioxidant fruits and vegetables, and sort of the way that plants and fruits and vegetables can be used as medicine. So, for example, the onions, garlic, scallions, and leeks contain a substance that help reduce damage to blood vessels, and they can help lower blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol. So the plant truly, it can be the medicine. There was a study that showed that regular use of garlic could lower cholesterol as much as 8%, and that would translate to an almost 40% reduction in the risk of cardiovascular events in a patient that's, say, like in their 50s, which is a huge impact. When we talk about foods, we also want to look at grains. So grains are a big part of the food pyramid. They've been a big recommended part of an American diet, and I think it's been overemphasized a little bit, but there is value in eating a grain as long as you're eating the whole grain. So what does a whole grain contain? It contains the germ, the endosperm, and the germ has the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and oils. The endosperm is the large inner part of the grain, which has carbohydrates, protein, and minerals. The bran has fiber and B vitamins. And there's various whole grains that you can add and include in your diet that might be better for you than sort of refined grains. So this differs from, as I just mentioned, refined grains. These are grains that have been processed. And in that process, the essential elements that make them nutritious have been removed. So vitamins, minerals, fibers. And then they go back and they add back synthetic nutrients to try to make them more nutritious again. But the problem is that these are not easily absorbed and there's not fiber added back to the diet. So white flour is a refined grain. It's found in many common foods, pizzas, pastas, breads, bagels, donuts. And so you have to really be careful when you're selecting grains for your part of your diet that you're selecting the ones that are actually whole and provide you with nutrients. And it's important to note that digestion of the carbohydrates that are in the grains requires B vitamins, which if you have them unrefined are in part of the whole grain. And if you don't have it, it can become depleted in your system. And a lot of people are deficient in B vitamins. The other thing that's really important to note is that the refined flour gets converted into glucose very quickly. And anytime anything is easily broken down into glucose, you can increase your blood sugar, and spikes in your blood sugar cause inflammation. So what about fat? I think probably for many years, fat has been the main culprit or alleged culprit in cardiovascular disease along with cholesterol. However, the recommendations are from a long time ago, and there have been multiple studies to date that have been unable to find any association between dietary fat, dietary cholesterol, and an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And there continues to be significant hesitation among medical professionals about telling people that saturated fat is not necessarily bad for you when provided in the appropriate setting. So what are some real, quote unquote, real fats? So butter, ghee, olive oil, these are things you can use to cook with. I often recommend cooking with butter because it's solid at room temperature, so it's more stable at higher temperatures. So any fat that's solid at room temperature, as you heat it up, it doesn't oxidize and become more inflammatory. And so generally speaking, when you're cooking meats and vegetables, you're cooking at higher temperatures on the stove. And so using butter, a little bit goes a long way. It adds flavor, and it also is a safer way to cook these foods than with vegetable oils. Omega-3s is something that's very commonly discussed in a healthy diet. It's found in fish, flax, walnuts, and grass-fed dairy and meat. And fatty acids are extremely important for a host of bodily functions, including proper brain and heart function. So in your body, you need fat. Being on a fat-free diet is unhealthy and can be dangerous. Fat's required for the absorption of essential vitamins and minerals. Vitamins A and D, lycopene, beta-carotene, these are powerful antioxidants. They boost your immune system and fight inflammation. And as I'll keep coming back to throughout this talk, the main culprit, the thing we didn't realize before when we were saying what is causing all this cardiovascular disease, is that it's inflammation. It's damage to the blood vessel that leads the body to try to fix the damage, which leads to the cardiovascular disease. It leads to the blockages in the arteries. The other thing that's really important to note is that saturated fats are actually required for your body to assimilate omega-3 fatty acids. So as it sort of should be, or maybe sound obvious when I say it, it's eating a balanced diet and making sure you're having all of the elements. So I think, in the process of creating the industrial food system, which is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, we introduced trans fats, refined and processed vegetable oils, and fake butter into the process in order to look for a low-fat or a fat-free type food. And we removed nutrients from these foods. So there are fats that are bad. And trans fats can cause cardiovascular disease and should be avoided. And they can also elevate triglyceride and actually make your cholesterol levels worse, but it's different. So it's all about specific type of fat, not fat in and of itself. So there has been a big push recently for, a plant-based diet and people avoiding meat and dairy because meat and dairy is bad for you, it's bad for the environment, and all of those things. And while industrially processed meats and dairy are probably bad for you and bad for the environment, like again, I will keep coming back to, it's the sourcing of the food and the way that it's treated, especially with animal foods, before it gets to you. Cows, they're ruminants, so they're meant to eat grass. They're meant to be out on pasture. The problem is that in factory farms and in factory feedlots, they're not provided space to be out in pasture and eating grass, so they eat grain. But that's not what they're meant to be eating, and that can cause infections and bacteria to overgrow in their gut, and it requires antibiotics to prevent the infections and the overgrowth of bacteria, so that you end up getting their food as antibiotics added to it, and then the antibiotics get in through the milk and the meat that we eat. So when you talk about pasture-raised, pasture-based foods, and when you're talking about meat and dairy, it's not so much about should you or should you not eat it, but it's about the quality of the one that you're eating. So it's not only what you eat, it's what you eats. It's kind of a tongue twister. But it's basically how the animals were raised. So pasture-raised animals roam freely in their natural environment. It's a lower stress environment. They eat grasses and other plants, and their bodies are adapted to digest it, so their meats become more nutritious. So it's been estimated that only 40% of Americans have an adequate supply of omega-3 fatty acids in their diet, and 20% have levels so low that they're not even detectable. And there's some suggestion that switching to meat and milk and dairy products of grass-fed animals is one way to restore these vital nutrients. They do have increased levels of omega-3 fatty acids. They also have higher levels of vitamin E, and vitamin E is known to be lower in the American diet. Vitamin E is linked with a lower risk of heart disease and cancer, and is a potent antioxidant. Additionally, there is a type of good fat called conjugated linoleic acid. This is found in grass-fed milk and dairy products and is one of the richest known sources of it. And it can be a potent defense against cancer. Eggs are another food that I think has been really vilified, and that really came along with the low cholesterol and low fat diet recommendations because there is like high levels of cholesterol found in the yolk or in the egg. And it's really unfortunate because eggs are actually like a self-contained whole food. It's perhaps the perfect food. They literally provide all of the nutrients necessary to create a life in this little tiny shell. So it's really important to note that eggs are rich in several nutrients that protect heart health, betaine and choline is found in the yolk. So if you skip it, you miss out on something that really helps lower homocysteine levels, and homocysteine levels can damage blood vessels. Elevated homocysteine can damage blood vessels and increase inflammation in the body system. It's kind of confusing because there's a lot of different categories, as is like every different type of food that's out there in the stores. There's cage-free, free-range, pasture-raised, organic, non-organic versions of all of those. They're categorized by the industry, so cage-free means they're not confined in a tiny little space, which if they don't say that, they are. And they're not free to ever leave it for their entire life. Free range is required a minimum amount of space for them to have to roam around. And then pasture-raised means, generally speaking, they're allowed out to pasture and can free to roam and eat whatever it is that's out there in the world. What I usually recommend to my patients and what I eat myself are pasture-raised eggs from pasture-raised chickens and pasture-raised chicken itself, and organic if possible, because then that means the additional food that they're supplemented with is also organic. They have a more varied diet, they have a less stressful environment, and they have a higher nutrient level. think an undebated important source of fats is omega-3 fatty acids. We discussed this a little bit already. They are known to raise HDL, which is your good cholesterol. And this is actually, this molecule actually is a repair molecule. It goes around repairing damage to blood vessels that's caused by inflammation. So the higher it is, the more protective. It's actually having a higher HDL is twice as protective to your cardiovascular health as having a low LDL, which is the quote-unquote bad cholesterol. And omega-3 fats raise HDL and lower LDL and reduce blood pressure. They reduce inflammation. They can lower triglyceride levels as well. And they've also been shown to be preventative against depression and anxiety and help with memory. They're found in high levels in wild-caught fish, salmon, sardines, black cod, anchovies, mackerel. The reason why wild-caught fish is preferable is it's higher in nutrients. It's also free of artificial dyes, antibiotics, grain feed. There are sort of debates about sustainable practices regarding fishing versus farming. However, like for example, salmon in a farmed environment does not have a pink skin, so you actually have food dye in your salmon that you eat that's farmed. So not just food, but what it is you're drinking. I think one of the secret dangers of an American diet is beverages. And perhaps one of the most straightforward changes that you can make in your diet, if you're going to change one single thing, I tell this to all my patients, is just completely eliminate any sodas, diet sodas, juices, other sweetened beverages. Doesn't matter if it's real sugar, fake sugar, you don't need it. You can drink plenty of fresh water, and generally speaking, a coffee or a tea if you want something different. Herbal teas are good, green tea is good, moderate amounts of black tea or like smaller amounts of coffee are good, but there's really no good reason to be drinking sodas or fruit juices. If you want to have fruit juice, you should just eat the whole fruit and have the juice with it. As far as alcohol, there's recommendations that a small amount of red wine is good for cardiovascular health. I don't think a small amount of alcohol on occasion is bad, and perhaps it's good. But you just have to keep in mind that alcohol is basically all sugar once it enters the body and the bloodstream. And as you spike your blood sugar levels, the excess sugar gets stored as fat. So it really should be seen as a treat enjoyed on a special occasion like a dessert or something like that. So sugar, we're getting to the real culprit when it comes to inflammation and damage and danger to your body and your health. So fructose is 2 times sweeter than glucose. It's found in high fructose corn syrup and then in sugar added to sweetener to items on the shelf. It's half glucose, half fructose. Fructose is metabolized in the liver very rapidly, and it floods your metabolic pathways in the liver, which increases triglycerides and gets converted to fat and then stored in the liver and can help lead to fatty liver disease, which, prior to recently, it wasn't a very common finding. And in fact, fatty liver disease is one of the increasing number one causes of cirrhosis, surpassing alcohol. It's becoming a bigger problem. Also, excessive fructose consumption can result in acute rises in blood pressure, in resistance to insulin, and risk for diabetes. It can increase your triglyceride serum level, so fats in the bloodstream, and that leads to increased cardiovascular risk, like I said, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, kidney stones. It's found, the high fructose corn syrup is found in a wide range of packaged and processed foods, including juices, sodas, cereal, bread, yogurt, ketchup, mayonnaise. Unclear why those things need sugar or corn syrup in them. It's in all of them. And the average American consumes about 60 pounds of high fructose corn syrup every year. So as far as sugar is concerned, you really want to avoid refined sugars. So the things I previously mentioned, and you really want to limit, in addition, in the refined carbohydrates. As I mentioned before, refined grains get converted easily into sugar, and then you spike your blood sugar levels that way as well. So why is it important to keep your blood sugar levels even throughout the day? Well, uneven blood sugars can lead to metabolic syndrome and diabetes. Elevated insulin levels in the blood are associated with higher cholesterol, bad cholesterol, triglycerides, higher blood pressure, and risk of cardiovascular death. You have to consider what we call the glycemic load of the food. So balancing higher glycemic index foods with lower ones. So apple, which has a lot of sugar, with cheese, or whole grain toast with an egg, so that your body can balance these things. So you're not just having these peaks and valleys in your blood sugar levels. It's also really important to note that higher calorie diets and higher calorie foods don't necessarily lead to cardiovascular risk. And this is where I'm correlating what it is that you're eating, like carbohydrates and sugars, that increase your inflammation in your blood vessels and leads to cardiovascular disease. If you think about a sumo wrestler's diet, they can eat up to 7,000 calories a day, and yet they don't suffer from heart, and weigh up to 400 pounds. So they don't have higher rates of heart attacks, strokes, or other symptoms of obesity, because they have a very specific diet that is balancing healthy calories and quality calories. So quality controls quantity. So the big question I get a lot is, how much should you eat? What is the right amount of calories per person per day? And what about the right amount of fat? And how do I figure it out? If fat's not bad and calories aren't all bad, then what do I do? What guidance is there? You have to really just think about quality versus quantity. It turns out that high quality calories and high quality foods will fill you up, and they don't spike your insulin levels. And so you're able to eat more of them without actually consuming very high. You don't have to eat a sumo wrestler diet. You don't have to eat 7,000 calories. You can eat, a lot of high quality foods and end up eating the same amount or sometimes even less calories than in these lower quality foods. And calorie requirements are really highly individualized and are based on your basal metabolic rate and your activity level and your exercise level and your size and your needs. So I think it's just really sort of short-sighted to say, eat this many calories, eat this much fat, and be done with it. And I think it's really important to just think about, maybe it's about what you're eating and not like I said, the breakdown, the nutritional breakdown of the calories or the fat that are in your food. So, many of us get the bulk of our calories from industrial nutrient-poor foods, and many times this really important vitamin minerals are lacking, like B12, B6, folic acid, betaine, and choline. Liver is a good source of B6 and B12 and folic acid and betaine and choline. Fish is another good source of B vitamins. You can see the whole grains, seafood, dairy, and leafy greens, and lentils are all a good source of all of these vitamins, the B vitamins, choline, and betaine. And eggs, again, are rich in nutrients for heart health. So what to avoid? What you really want to avoid is processed, packaged industrial foods, trans fats, refined grains, and flour products, sodas and sugary drinks, anything that has high fructose corn syrup, and any added sugars. When I tell people to just look and see how much added sugar, or sugar one of the first ingredients in something, and then just don't eat that unless you're looking to actually add sugar to something, which you probably shouldn't do it anyway. So what about organic? The nutrient value of organic food continues to be debated. There's a new article out, every few months. It's good, it's bad, it's better, it's worse, it's neither. And it can be very confusing. The other thing is, not all organic food is created equal. So organic whole foods are different than organic processed foods. And whole foods are good, generally speaking, and processed foods are bad, generally speaking. So again, organics become a buzzword, like plant-based, that basically is a whole industry around the idea to defeat the purpose. So if you're, avoiding chemicals and pesticides in fruits and vegetables and dairy and meats, so that you can have the maximum nutrients and the minimum poison from a food, but then you take all of those basic ingredients and then refine them and process them and add preservatives, then you've sort of defeated the whole purpose of the concept. So one study in the Annals of Internal Medicine said, head-to-head compared conventional meats and vegetables to organic, and found that overall there was no nutritional benefit. So that was sort of the headline, the buzzword, everything that, came up was, okay, well, it's not better, so don't waste your money, don't waste your time. But then in the body of the article, they noted that there were slightly higher phosphorus levels in organic foods and higher omega-3 fatty acid content in organic milk and chicken. They did note that the organic produce had a 30% lower pesticide residue than the conventional foods. But then they went on to say that in general, the pesticide levels were both within allowable safety limits. So I guess the question is, what kind of levels do you feel are allowable for you and your family of consumption of pesticides? And like, who gets to decide if there's an allowable level of poison for you to ingest in your foods? There's other studies that then compared them side by side and said, well, actually, no, organic vegetables have much higher levels of antioxidants, quercetin, vitamin C, vitamin E than conventional samples. But is this statistically significant? And then again, like, does it matter to you if it is or is not statistically significant? It's sort of parsing things. If you have less pesticides and more nutrients, or maybe slightly more nutrients or the same, I think, that's a reason to consider it if it's an option for you. So it's a lot of information, and it's a lot of kind of myth busting about different types of foods, what's good, what's bad, what's neither. So sort of just kind of, the environmental working group tried to summarize, okay, well, organic foods are not as accessible. They maybe can't be as affordable for people. So what do you do? Like, how do you decide, well, which ones have to be organic and which ones don't? And how can I sort of split the difference if I have to? And they found what they called the dirty dozen. So this is 12 different fruits and vegetables that are found to have very high concentrations of pesticides. They absorb them more from the soil or more into the body of the fruit or vegetable. So like strawberries, grapes, peaches, spinach, kale, like dark green leafy vegetables, nectarines, apples, potatoes, and peppers. And then they also listed something called the Clean 15. So this is 15 different items that may not have as much pesticide residue on them and may be okay to eat conventionally, although I would disagree with corn as a conventional option. But things like avocado, pineapple, onions, eggplants, melon, things that have a thick rind or sort of an impenetrable surface. So how do you approach it? How do you say, well, I want to be able to do this, but, fresh food goes bad and it's going to rot in my fridge and it's going to be expensive and then I'm not going to use it. I think people have a lot of anxiety about that. You really have to plan. And the planning is difficult and it takes time, but if you plan one day at the beginning of 1 week, then at the end of the day when you're stressed and tired and you've had a long day, you already know what's for dinner. You have your Monday meal, your Tuesday meal. I make a meal that lasts me 3 or 4 days, and I have my meal for the first half of the week and my meal for the second half of the week. So you can plan these things weekly and plan a shopping list weekly and then have healthy snacks available for you. And it's not just like being so strict. Like I said before, fad diets and diets, they don't work. They're not sustainable because they're about restricting. So you want to get away from trying to restrict yourself or punish yourself or say that I can only eat these foods all the time. If you're eating real foods and you're looking after yourself and your body for 80% of the food that you eat, then 20-ish% of the time you can have something that maybe isn't perfect or good, but your body is in a healing state and it's not in a chronic inflammatory state. So if it's given something that's a little bit inflammatory or spikes your blood sugar, it can process it and move on from that and recover from it instead of being in a constant state of inflammation. So just, eat whole foods, eat organic if you can, lots of leafy green vegetables, fruits, beans, pasture raised if you can, meats, dairy, and eggs, wild caught fish. Cook with butter. Table salt is not your enemy. Sodium is another point of contention, which I really didn't get into in this talk, but sodium as table salt, you really can't over-salt your food with table salt. If you do, it will taste disgusting and you'll throw it in the trash. Sodium is a problem when it's added as a preservative into canned foods or processed foods, and so it always comes back to, are you getting it in a way that is the way it's supposed to be seen by the body or not? And the other thing to remember is that I've just provided an explanation of the ideal way to approach food, and I fully understand that the solutions I've given you are individual solutions, and they are not necessarily something that everybody can afford to do or has time to do, and it's a systemic problem. What we've done is we've created an industry around making people sick in order to profit off, fad diets and foods that'll last forever and are cheap to make and cheap to sell. But it's a systemic problem. And the true solution is having a healthcare system and a food system that provides people with affordable real foods and eliminates these quote unquote foods that are that are actually killing us. So I appreciate your time, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Dr. Wartman. That was such great information, and we do have a few questions from our viewers. The first one we have here is, there is a new trend in plant-based meat substitutes like hamburgers and links. What are your thoughts on this?
So they're not good, are my thoughts. It sort of goes back to what I said about these fads. So organic, industrial organic, heart healthy, low cholesterol, low fat. Plant-based is when you eat plants, right? That's good. Eating a synthetic meat that's made out of like some sort of broken down byproduct of a plant is just a processed food. And I'm not sure that it makes any sense to be making a meat in a lab. You either can have a system that can provide meats that are raised sustainably and provided the nutrients that make them healthy foods, or you can't. But trying to find some sort of chemical substitute is really just like completely lost the plot.
Okay. Another question we have is, I am on a calorie restrictive diet. Some of the foods you mentioned are high in calories. How should I navigate that?
It's a great question. I get that question a lot. People are very concerned or very, strict about reducing the calories in their diet. So what I tell patients to do is when you go to the store, turn over the box or hopefully you're just picking up the fruits and vegetables and meats and eggs and cheese and walking out. But say you're going to buy something that's in a box or a can or whatever. Flip it over, and the only thing you want to look at from the nutritional label with the breakdown of the calories and the fat is added sugar. That's the only thing that you're going to be worried about. The other thing you want to look at is the ingredients list, and you want to recognize the words in that list. You want to have heard of them before. If it's chemical substances, if it's preservatives, if gums and all these things, these are not things that you're meant to be processed by your digestive system. These are not things you should be eating or introducing. There are some boxed or canned foods that are not necessarily bad, that are okay snacks. You just have to really minimize the amount of added sugar and refined grains. And like I said, high calorie and fat dense foods that are nutrient dense also are more filling, and generally speaking you don't end up eating that many more calories in the long run, and you end up being healthier. And the healthier you are and the less inflammation you have, the fitter you become and the more energy you have for more activity.
Okay, so the last question we have is, what are a few ways to start shopping for a real food diet?
So I steal the little 5-minute spiel that my PA, Anna Chun, gives to our patients. We do a nutrition education mini session in every new patient visit that we have, because patients love to talk about it. They don't have a lot of guidance and there are a lot of questions. And what she says is, it can be overwhelming, and the information I gave you, it's kind of hard to keep track of it all. But basically, the perimeter of the grocery store is where you'll find all of the foods that I've been recommending. So avoid all the center aisles and just start from one end around the periphery and go to the produce aisle, and then go to the fish counter and the meat counter and then the dairy. And then, and then if you want to have bread, there's almost every grocery store in the area that I've been here in the East Bay has a section with local baked breads. So if you're going to buy a bread, you want to buy a bread that will go bad in a week. If your bread's going to stay on the shelf for longer than that, then there's something in it that you're not supposed to be eating.
Okay, that's great information. This concludes our program. Thank you, Dr. Wartman, for this insightful presentation, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in. The entire broadcast of today's event will be available on our Facebook page and YouTube.